Welcome to the Strong Women's Club, episode number 90.
This is the Strong Women's Club, where successful women share their behind-the-scenes stories of how they got to where they are today. Join us.
Hi, everybody. This is Edie Berg. Thank you so much for joining me today. So I'm having a bit of trouble with my trusty mic, which I usually love, but it seems to not be working now, even though I thought they were impossible to break. Seems that I have managed to break it, but there is a lifetime warranty. I just have to get it organized. So I hope that this sounds okay. It's just for the intro and the outro. For the body of the interview, everything was working fine. So I apologize for the difference in the sound quality. But this week's guest is Rabbi Jackie Tabick. She was fantastic to talk to you. So fun to speak to somebody in Britain. It's a very different culture and different society. Things work there differently to what I'm used to from the United States and from Australia. So it's fun to talk to her. Rabbi Jackie reluctantly became Britain's first female rabbi. And she tells us the story all about that, how that came to be and why it's reluctantly. Very interesting story. And currently, Rabbi Jackie is the convener of the movement for Reform Judaism's Beit Din, which is the court of Jewish law. And she's the first woman in that role as well. And I asked her if she could tell us some interesting questions that come up at the Beit Din. And she does. She tells us a very compelling story that spans generations. It's a beautiful story, so you get to hear that also on the podcast coming right up. So let's get into it. I hope you enjoy my talk with Rabbi Jackie Tabick. Rabbi Jackie Tabick, thank you so much for coming onto the Strong Women's Club. I'm excited to talk to you and to hear all about your story, so welcome.
Thank you very much indeed.
It's such a pleasure to talk to you. I don't get many guests from England, so we'll get a new perspective on the program. And I guess your call to fame is that you were the first female rabbi in Britain, which is a very big deal. And I know that you're probably tired of telling your story, but in my program, in my little world, it'll be new. So if you don't mind, I'm going to start way from your very beginning and tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what kind of a family you grew up in.
Okay. I actually was born in Dublin. And we moved from Dublin to Manchester when I was 4, and then down to London when I was 7. I came from a fairly traditional British Orthodox family, i.e., my mother always lit candles. We always observed, had Friday night dinners together. We would go to synagogue occasionally, I think. But I don't have much memory of those days. My father had multiple sclerosis, and he was on a wheelchair from when my mother was 6 months pregnant with me. So life was a little tough at that time. I know financially it was tough, and my mother was working all hours to support us.
What did she do?
Anything that was required, really. She was a very good salesperson. So in Dublin, she worked, at one point, she worked in a jeweller's shop. Apparently she was selling sort of mug and davids and things to Catholic women on the grounds these were wonderful things for people to have. Really good source of mazal, of good luck.
That is a good salesperson.
Yes, she was a wonderful salesperson. And then when we came to Manchester, and from then on, we used to have a big house, and part of the house would be let out in in rented accommodation, little flatlets.
Just like we do now with Airbnb.
Well, not quite, because these were done all the year, not just the short lets.
Okay.
These were long-term lets, and she was a very good landlady in that she looked after her tenants. And they were always interesting people. We had some interesting people around.
And did you have brothers and sisters?
I did. Mm-hmm. I do, in fact. I have a brother who lives in Israel. He lives up in Nahariya. And I have a sister who lives in Nottingham. And nieces and nephews. And our father died when I was 7. And my memory only starts from that day.
Really?
So I don't know. But I'm sure it was a happy family life. Or at least it was a secure family life, because I'd grown up to be a fairly secure person. So, I'm sure it was okay. It's just I can't remember it. And from that time, we were a very close-knit family unit. I was the baby of the family. My brother in particular used to look after me, take me places. He felt a responsibility for me. He was considerably older than me. I've had a close relationship since forever with my brother and sister. Even though we live apart, we speak often and see each other when we can. And my mother was a wonderful person. She had a deep underlying faith in God. She didn't question it. When I was around 10, we joined the local Reform Synagogue, mostly because her brother had arrived in London by then and had joined that synagogue. So we went to be with him. And my religious education really started when I was about 10. My mother also joined the choir of the synagogue. She had a magnificent voice. And so willy-nilly, I was part of the choir too from the age of 10. And I learned an enormous amount by being a part of the choir. In fact, I'm now one of the 2 surviving founder members of the choir. I went and visited that old synagogue of mine last Shabbat. And
nice.
was invited to sing with the choir, which was great fun.
That is fun.
I learned an enormous amount about Judaism by being part of a choir, because you have to know what's going on in the service. I went every Shabbat and festivals.
Oh, how nice. And it's also, those experiences really give you a community and an extended family that's very important.
It was certainly very important to me. I suspect I had wonderful father figures around that I could use. And one of the great advantages of father figures is you can switch them. So when one doesn't live up to your expectation, you can find a different one.
That is useful. Okay, so that's when you start, your love for being part of a congregation started.
And also I was very aware from that congregation of the beginnings really of interfaith work, which I've been involved with all my life really, because the rabbi there started the first discussions really between Germans and Jews. This is, of course, was a very big issue and he started. I went when I was 18 on a trip to Germany with the youth group from the synagogue, and Rabbi Dov Marmor, he now lives in Jerusalem, was my rabbi, and we went on a trip and met people from a youth group up in northern Germany, a Christian youth group, and had discussions with them. And some of their community came to visit our community as well. And this was really very important. My mother taught me always, and was involved in community, on being involved in helping others. She always went out to help others. She had a heart of gold. So if anybody was sick, she would take them food. She went to help teach children to read in a school for deaf children, because she was hard of hearing. So she would show them her hearing aid and talk to them, and they felt there was a bother there. And she also got involved in teaching immigrant women from the Indian subcontinent who didn't really go out of their homes very much. She went round to them as part of a synagogue initiative to help teach them English. And she would take magazines, women's magazines, and would sit and talk to these women to help them develop language skills.
So how did you go from just being part of, the youth groups there at the synagogue to this a very big leap to actually wanting to run it and to actually be a rabbi, right? So I mean, there's two different things, right? But it's a big jump.
I'm not sure running would be very much like running a synagogue, but that's a different matter. I was always fascinated by the job that my rabbi was doing, Rabbi Dr. and highly impressed and really quite inspired by what he was doing in his job. I was part of that synagogue revolution where women in the reform movements in Britain were beginning to take leadership roles. So I was a lay reader in the congregation. I might have only started my religious education at 10, formally. I didn't go to Cheder before then. But because I went at 10 and I was put in a class of 5-year-olds, I learned Hebrew incredibly quickly. And I got myself out of there very quickly. And so I was taking part in services. And it actually was youth group that led me many ways, because I wasn't involved in the synagogue youth group very much. But I was involved in a group called the World Union for Progressive Judaism Youth Section, which we called Whoopshies because that was quite a mouthful. And Whoopshies organised conferences across Europe for young Jews who were interested in learning Judaism as part of their youth group experience, rather than just play table tennis or whatever. So they would organise top-notch conferences. Rabbi Steinsaltz came to one of our conferences in Holland, and I still remember that to this day in the conversations we had with him. There was this wonderful occasion where we were inundated with wasps, and he was standing there, and he said, what are you frightened of? And he put his hand out, and these wasps settled on his hand. And he just talked to them. I don't know what he said, he whispered to them, and they flew away. It was amazing.
That is amazing.
So it was an incredible experience going to all these conferences. Mm-hmm. And around 10 Reform rabbis came from this youth group over the years. I was the youngest, the last one of the line. And we all ended up becoming rabbis.
But you didn't have any role models of other women. I mean, and it's not exactly like when you don't have role models, it's hard to put yourself in, to even imagine yourself in a position like that.
I went to university first, and I trained as a teacher first. Before I went to the Livet College, I was really putting it off in the hope that another woman would get there before me, because I really didn't want to be first particularly. It was not my dream. I was very influenced by the congregation I grew up in, because, we were allowed to be lay readers. There were women in leadership roles there. And I went to the college. When I first applied to the college, in fact, they sent a letter back, "Dear Mr. Acker," it was my maiden name, which was funny because quite a few of the people there, certainly the dean of the college and some of the lecturers, knew me from Whoopshies because they'd been at these conferences. But they still wrote back Mr. because I don't think they put two and two together. And I signed the letter Jacqueline, so and,
they were in denial.
Absolutely. Nothing happened for months. And I got to the point where I was accepted for a job as a teacher. And, what was I going to do? And then I was advised to write a letter to the college, copying in Rabbi Hugo Gryn, who at that point was the senior rabbi of West London Synagogue, and that if I did that, people would start taking me seriously, and they did.
Mm-hmm.
And I did go for an interview. Of course, it was all men who interviewed me, and one of them questioned whether I could read any Hebrew, because after all, women couldn't, as far as he was concerned.
Couldn't read Hebrew?
Absolutely.
Oh.
I'm talking 1970.
Well, they could barely even read, really, then.
Well,
I mean,
course. Go to university. Well, that was a mistake, obviously.
They're sorry about that now. They're sorry they let any of us in.
Absolutely. So he asked me to read Hebrew. None of the other candidates were asked to read Hebrew. Luckily, they had a Mishnah there with Brachot, and I had been studying that with Rabbi Dov Marmor. So I was able to read and translate immediately, and that sort of killed that one. But I was unsure myself, so I went into the college to learn. And they asked me, would you promise, do you really want to become a rabbi? I said, I don't know. I want to learn and see how it goes. I can't promise anything at this stage. So they didn't give me a grant. All the other male students get grants. I didn't get one. But Rabbi Hugo Gryn stepped in and gave me a job at West London Synagogue.
Oh, that was very forward thinking of him.
So I worked there in the education, but I was very poor. It was a difficult year.
That's very hard.
If I tell you that I ended up putting cardboard in my shoes because they had holes.
Really?
It was an interesting year.
That's too hard.
It wasn't. It forms character.
It makes a good story, but at the time, I'm sure it was
interesting.
Not the best. Yeah. Okay.
It was interesting. I certainly didn't tell my mother what I was doing. She would have been
Isn't that
horrified.
funny? Even now, we're still scared of our mothers. I mean, at any age.
I was just. She didn't really want me to be doing that anyway. It wasn't a job for a good Jewish woman, and she was scared I'd never get married. That was one of the fears.
Yep.
And in fact, they put some extra money into. My mother and my brother agreed my mother should give me extra money in her will, because obviously I would never get married, and therefore I would need more support.
Well, good. Well.
She was gorgeous and lovely, my mother.
Of course. It's not connected. The two things are not connected. Yeah.
Absolutely. And at the end of that year, one of my colleagues in my year, in the rabbinic program, you must know that Learbeck College usually never has more than 10 to 15 students over 5 years. Mm-hmm. It's a tiny college. So everybody knew each other.
Mm-hmm.
So one of them went to the organizing body, the governing body, and said, we weren't asked whether we were going to be rabbis. That's discrimination. So you must give her a grant. So the next year I did get a grant.
Oh, good.
And I carried on at the college. And when I was in my final year, I was talking to Rabbi Louis Jacobs, who was our Talmud teacher, a great, great, lovely man. And I was working on my thesis, which was the place of an asufi, of an abandoned child, a foundling in Jewish law. And I'd gone to his house, those days, no computers. So he was my encyclopedia. And he was finding various teshuvot, various answers for me, given over the years. And I was looking through the material. And suddenly he looked at me and said, I can't see any reason in tradition why you shouldn't become a rabbi. And then he carried on teaching. And I'm a fairly traditional Reform Jew.
Right.
That was the thing that pushed me over the edge. And then I agreed to go forward. And sepsimicha.
So why do you think you were reluctant to be the first, even though in the end, I mean, it turned out that you were the first, but why do you feel that you were reluctant?
Because I wasn't a flag-waving feminist ever. And I know it may sound funny, but I'm not the person to push myself forward.
Mm-hmm.
I don't push myself forward. If I do a job, I get on with it. And I hope I do it to a good standard. But I'm not somebody who pushes for their rights.
I see. So maybe it would make you uncomfortable if other women would come to you and say, how did you do it? Or why did you do it? Or can I do it? Or you would have to think, you would need to have some kind of a conflict for them. Or is it the conflict?
Over the years, lots of people have come to speak to me.
I'm sure.
Because that's an interpersonal thing. I'm talking to one person. And that's fine.
Right. But I mean, against like the rabbis, I don't know what it's like in England, but I don't know how big like the Reformed movement was. I mean, at that time, the Reformed movement in the United States there were already female rabbis. And
well, Sally Preston was ordained 2 years before me. So it's only just then as well.
And did you know of her?
No. Well, yes. Sorry. I'd heard of her. But again, without internet and stuff, right. I actually only met her for the first time 2 years ago.
Nice. Okay, so you became the rabbi and became an assistant rabbi in West London.
Yes, I worked throughout my student days, and then but they didn't make me an assistant rabbi immediately. They made me the education director.
Even though you were a full-fledged rabbi.
Because they didn't want to go to the community to ask them permission to appoint me as rabbi.
And what kind of a synagogue, what kind of a congregation, who goes to that synagogue? What kind of people are there that go there? Is it a conservative? Is it a reform place? I mean, at that time?
It's a reform synagogue. Have to understand, in Britain, the reform movement is about a third, I suppose, of British Jewry. So it's not in the majority.
No.
Yes.
Right.
It's a smaller group. And reform in Britain was positioned really between the reform movement in the States and the conservative movement.
Right.
There's another progressive movement in England called the liberal Judaism.
Okay.
Which was more in the picture, more in the style of the reform movement in the States as it was then.
I see. So it's more reformed or more traditional.
Well, yeah, reform movement is more traditional than
right.
At least it was then. Things change.
Yes, things do change.
But at that point, West London Synagogue on the High Holy Days in the main synagogue, the women were still upstairs, the men downstairs. In the overflow, there was mixed seating. And it was only 2 years after I joined the staff there that women began to come down from the gallery on the High Holy Days. Within 3-4 years, there was total mixed seating at the main synagogue too. And also, I mean, there were very few Banot Mitzvah, girls having a bat mitzvah, because it was just not seen as the thing to do. Within a few years of my being there, then the numbers evened out as they should have been. And they should have. So West London is often called the Cathedral Synagogue. It was the first Reform synagogue in Great Britain. It's a very big synagogue. In those days, it's very, very different now. So we're talking in 1970, 75, when I was ordained. People would still dress up on Kol Nidre to go to synagogue. The wardens wore top hats and,
Oh, really dress up?
Yes. Oh, yes. It was quite the place to be. It was quite fashionable.
Yeah.
It was a lot of Jewish aristocracy went there.
Yeah.
If that makes sense to you.
It does.
The old service was you and me and ordinary people.
Yeah.
But the main synagogue on the High Holy Days.
So on the one hand, it's very traditional, and where
traditional, but traditional in Reform terms.
Right. Yes. Traditional in English terms, in that they were wearing top hats and they're getting very, very formal kind of look to it. Right. So, I mean, and on the other hand, you have a Reformed synagogue where it's taking the actual religion, I mean, the content and changing and becoming more liberal as opposed to conservative. It's an interesting dichotomy a little bit at that time.
It was an interesting place. It was a fascinating place to be. And Rabbi Hugo Gryn was a wonderful rabbi to work with.
Okay, so then how did you advance in your career? I know that eventually you worked there for a long, long time, and then you were not given the position as the head rabbi. And then why did that happen? And then what were the choices you had to make?
I can't talk fully about it because I had to sign an agreement.
Okay.
Which tells you volumes.
Okay. So then you moved on.
That's right.
And we'll move on.
I cracked a ceiling.
Okay. And
I moved on. I became the rabbi of a lovely synagogue called North West Surrey Synagogue, which is down in South London. A lovely synagogue, and I was there for 15 years. And then from there, I moved on to take a part-time job at the Reform movement as the convener of the Beit Din for both Britain and some congregations in Europe, and was doing odd part-time jobs in congregations as well. And now I've become the part-time rabbi of a synagogue called West Central Synagogue, which is part of the liberal movement, and works in the centre of London. So I'm their part-time rabbi and also running the Beit Din.
The Beit Din.
So I'm now doing a full-time job again.
So it sounds very interesting. The Beit Din, I'm wondering how that works because I'm so used to, I've been living in Israel for so long, and we have an interesting Beit Din here, and depends on who you are, but it's difficult in many different ways. Let's talk about the contrast to the Beit Din that you are part of, and how would you describe it?
Well, our Beit Din is, as far as I'm concerned, my role is to help people as much as I can within certain boundaries, but the boundaries can often be flexible.
But you're actually making decisions, right? So people come to the Beit Din if they have a question and they need some kind of a decision made by lawmakers, basically.
Basically, our Beit Din deals mostly with gerut, with conversion, and other status cases. So adoption. These days, we deal with children born of surrogate mothers. We have gay couples gay men who come with a baby born from a surrogate mother who has to be converted to be part of the community. We deal with gittin, and we will point out to the male that if he is recalcitrant, then we will, in fact, on his behalf, give a get to the woman because it's in his best interest that we do so. Mm-hmm. So
you could do that.
We brook no nonsense.
Yeah.
And it usually means that the man then agrees.
Yes.
We deal with status mostly.
Mm. So maybe you have an interesting story to tell us of an interesting case that came through last little while that you can think of, or.
Well, I mean, some of the most interesting cases come through in Poland and Spain and those sorts of countries, really. So the one that hits me most at the moment was a few months ago where this now fairly elderly gentleman came, and And of course, he's married to a Polish woman who was Christian. They've had children who were not brought up as Christians, but not as anything else either, and grandchildren. And he'd always known that he'd been adopted when he was 6 months old. And that was just before the fall of the Warsaw Ghetto. And when he arrived at this family, he was emaciated. He had infections. He'd had a Brit Milah, a circumcision that was infected. He was a mess. And a family took him in. They were a Christian family. Though looking at their name and later life, this man is convinced they too had Jewish roots. But they were a Christian family in this very difficult situation in Nazi-occupied Poland. They say they think he came from the ghetto because, babies were smuggled out.
Yes.
And they brought him up in Polish communist times, telling him that they thought he was Jewish and they thought he had come from the ghetto. And they would try every now and then and do something like make a challah for him for a Friday or something. Because, of course, you couldn't buy these things.
Mm.
And
it's touching.
So he always knew this. Mm. But, of course, he grew up and he got married, as I said, and it's now what he must be in his 80s. He has realized that there are progressive Jewish communities in Poland who are willing to accept him back as a Jew, even though he's got a non-Jewish wife and non-Jewish children and grandchildren. So he went and found a progressive community in Warsaw, studied, came to the Beit Din, and went to mikveh. And he told us that one of his sons had been in a shop a few months before, and a woman had been mouthing off about those Jews. And this is in Poland. This anti-Semitism is still there. And he turned round to this woman and said, "You are abusing me. I am a Jew." And his man was so proud of his son, and his grandchildren have started going to synagogue. So maybe they too will return. That's an amazing story.
It is an amazing story.
To be able to help that situation.
So interesting. It's a fantastic story. It's wonderful that you can help them, really. And what I find fascinating is the pull, his need to be part of his history.
Absolutely.
At this age. And maybe all along, I mean, it must have been nagging at him
yes.
all his life.
Well, they didn't bring their children up as Christians. They weren't baptized.
Mm-hmm.
And that in Poland is a statement.
So fascinating, people and what drives them.
Absolutely. I'm very privileged that all these years as a rabbi, I've been able to be part of people's stories. That's for me one of the most important bits, to be able to help them, through the life crises of moments of joy and moments of sadness and moments when they've needed an outside voice and maybe the voice of tradition to be there for them, and that I've been able to share our fantastic tradition with them.
Yeah, what do you think? I'm going to ask you a question that has nothing to do with anything really, but what do you think draws people? What do you think is in us that makes us need religion, do you think?
Well, for me, it's an innate understanding belief that we're not totally alone here. I don't want to be totally alone. I want to be able to praise that oneness that is there. I believe that there is a oneness in the universe, and I want to be able to praise that oneness. And I want to be able to, because I think that oneness is so important. Because if you have a oneness, then all people on this earth are part of that oneness.
Right.
So we ought to be treating all of us with respect and creation with respect. because that's part of that oneness. And that, for me, is
yeah, it's a very nice way of putting things. When you say oneness, you mean a deity, right? A God.
Yeah, try not God. To get into those words.
Right, exactly. No, this is what I'm emphasizing, in that you're saying it in a way that is very inclusive. And you had spoken about before about being part of an inclusive community. And that enables us to break out of, when you speak in that way, it enables people who love religion and love being part of their own religion to be able to reach out to other people who love being part of their religions and to the same oneness.
That's my hope, yes.
Right.
I've vice president, I chaired, and I'm now I think actually I'm a co-president. I forgot. I voted. I'm co-president of a group called the World Congress of Faiths.
Yeah, what is that?
It was started, it's one of the earliest interfaith movements, which was started way back, and started by a British diplomat who was part of the old empire. And he went and worked for a time in Nepal and discovered that there was something greater than the Church of England notion of God. And we talk about the oneness behind creation. Every religion should be separate and keep its own thoughts and faiths and its ways, because people are different and they have different ways of needing to approach that oneness. But one has to understand that there is that oneness, because that gives us a means of respecting other people and the way that they approach God themselves.
Beautiful. Rabbi Jackie Tabick, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your stories and your life with us here on the Strong Women's Club. Such a pleasure to meet you and to be able to get to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to talk.
Thank you again to Rabbi Jackie Tabick for sharing her time and sharing her stories and her outlook with us here today. If you like the podcast, please share it also with a friend or two or a family member who you think would also appreciate these stories from groundbreaking Jewish women. Also, you can go ahead and sign up for the Strong Jewish Women Summit. Our online conference for Jewish women globally is ready. It's completely free. We have there Jewish women speaking about leadership and about issues around breaking stereotypes, and some Jewish thought leaders and entrepreneurs. So basically, if you're a Jewish woman, doesn't matter where you live, but if you'd like to get a lot of information and get access to, there's approximately 25 women who I interview on video, and you can hear them and see them for free. You just have to sign up. That's you can find at thestrongjewishwomensummit.com, exactly as you hear it. There's a double S in there after Women's Summit. So it's thestrongjewishwomensummit.com. I'm very, very excited about that. Let me know if everything works properly on the site. Check it out, because I'm just starting to promote it now, and there could be a couple of bugs in there. So hopefully there aren't. If there are, please let me know about them, and I'll quickly get them fixed, I hope. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for sharing the podcast with your friends and your family members. And thank you for joining me over at the Strong Jewish Women Summit. Ciao for now, and litraot.